Hi, I'm Tim Eskew.
And I'm Amanda Stradling. We are East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work.
Wellness, well-being, and mindfulness are trending right now as organizations try to attract and retain the best talent in this tumultuous post-COVID world. At the Leader Lab, we agree these are important concepts and overdue for being fully utilized in the workplace.
We also believe that these concepts only work when you treat the mind and body as a whole. We are excited to be part of a societal shift in attention toward the whole person. We invite you to join us as we begin to look broadly and deeply at wellness, well-being, and mindfulness in the workplace.
Welcome back to East Valley Leader Lab's Mind and Body at Work. In these podcasts, Amanda and I have promised to go broad and deep into the topic of well-being in the workplace. And we have somebody today that, like most of our guests, is the leader of an organization. And we believe he is uniquely qualified. I know he's going to broaden my perspectives, and I think he's going to broaden a lot of our perspectives on the topic of wellness in the workplace, well-being in the workplace, and just about anything else you can think of. So our guest today is Jeffrey Cohen.
Hello.
Jeffrey is Dean of Humanities in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Arizona State University here in Tempe. He oversees 360 full-time faculty and serves thousands of students on campus and online. He's just completed his 5th year as Dean here at ASU. Before that, he spent 20 years at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. If you haven't been paying attention to academia, there has been a decline, like a decade-long decline in humanities enrollment and retention, keeping people in the humanities programs in general in universities. However, ASU's humanities enrollment and retention are both very healthy. They're thriving. And that's even after dealing with the COVID disruption that, of course, all of us had to go with. So there's something different going on at ASU Humanities. We suspect that something that starts at the top and goes through the organization, like a culture. And we're curious to hear about that today as well, Jeffrey. I want to mention that in addition to your administrative responsibilities, you keep up your research and your writing in the topics of medieval studies, monster theory, hope we can get a little bit into that, post-humanism, and eco-criticism. Jeffrey's most recent book is Noah's Arkive, that's Arkive, A-R-K-I-V-E, Towards an Ecology of Refuge, which he co-wrote with Julian Yates. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And I'm confident that even though some people might see some disparity between the topic of Noah's Ark and wellness in the workplace, you might be able to make that connection. But before we go right into that, let's learn a little bit more about you and this big job you have at ASU.
Sure. So I am Dean of Humanities in a College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. It's one of the biggest in the country. We have a special mission to serve those who are often left out of the educational mission. So it's about access, it's about inclusion, and it's making sure that everyone does well once we're in the door. Another way of putting this is that many public universities are satisfied if 50% of their freshman class makes it through to their sophomore year. We set as our objective 90% retention of that class. We're at 87% right now. Really want it to be a place where all can succeed. We serve a lot. I think it's 33% of our students are first in their family to come to college. The majority of those are students of color. Our students come from all over the world in every state. So we represent the diversity not only of the nation, but also of the world. And our experiment is to see if we can come up with a way to educate people at scale in a way that's just as good as private, elite, highly selective, which means highly rejective universities.
That's
Excellent.
Wonderful. So how does this mission at ASU connect with your personal care and some of your life missions?
And thanks for asking that. I think one of the reasons why I've been so happy at ASU is I am in an institution that aligns with my values. And among my values are ensuring that the doors are open, there's a welcome for all, and that everybody has a chance to get the education they deserve. I think too often we are satisfied with an educational system that is based on selecting people, closing doors, really just ensuring that a minority of students will do well and not giving everyone all the access they need in order to get the education that they deserve. Another way of putting this is, and I will say I went through this system myself and in retrospect realized what some of its drawbacks are. Many educational institutions select for success before you come in the door. So, if you're taking 1 or 2% of your students, you got the cream of the crop and they're going to do well. And in some ways, they don't even need your institution. They need the resources, but they've been pre-selected to do well. Yes. What about all the students who couldn't get those test scores, who didn't have the families that were able to afford the private tutors, who gave them all of these, who allowed them to start from a starting point that's far more along the line than many other students? It has been my experience, this has really been something that ASU has taught me well. It's not that the B students are any worse than the A students. They just started from a different place. They have some catching up to do, and they're perfectly willing to do it if you give them the resources that they need.
Yeah, the potential is equal, but the starting place isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask a follow-up question about C+ students just for a friend of mine, but we don't need to cover that right now.
All right. So you know what, Tim? One of my favorite students that I've bonded with, and he and I are going to be at a conference together, is a student who failed out of high school, which makes him ineligible for college admission. You can't go to college without complete. Actually, at ASU, you don't need the high school degree, but you do need to have satisfied some prerequisites which show that you're ready for college. We have something called earned admissions, where you take at your own pace 4 different courses. You don't have to pay for the credit until you've actually succeeded and gotten a good grade. And this guy, Jim, he went through all 4 courses. He applied for admission. He got in. He's a history major. He's as happy as can be. But, this is someone that in an earlier time might have been written off as someone for whom college is just not appropriate. For Jim, college is exactly the place that he's thriving in, but he just wasn't ready for it until later in life. And now he's doing incredibly well, and it's great to see his success.
Yeah. Nice story.
That's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about your responsibilities. What does the Dean of Higher Education at ASU do?
So my responsibilities as dean mean that I'm part of a leadership team that is charged with the care, the intellectual, psychological, you name it, wellness of our entire student population, but also our staff, our faculty. We're all one community. And we want to make sure, and this was especially palpable during COVID, we want to make sure that everyone feels like they have what they need in order to do their jobs well, survive, thrive, feel like they're part of something bigger and feel like they're included. I love being at a mission-driven institution, so we have a charter that tells us that we are to be judged not by whom we exclude, but by whom we include and how they succeed. It also tells us that we produce knowledge that is of social consequence, so we are turned toward the world and trying to achieve something good in the world, and that we are in a general sense, charged with the health of the communities that we serve, and that that health runs the whole gamut. So that's a big way of saying that it's a big mission that we have to enact.
Yeah, that encompasses so much.
Encompasses so much, including we have a deep care for example, student mental health, but really good resources to serve students at scale when it comes to these things. We have a deep compassion also for the families that bring their children here and try to include them in the educational mission. We try to reach out to the local community in which we're embedded. So it's almost everything that we have to do, which seems impossible. But when you work in a community that is aligned under the mission like ASU is, actually seems like all things are possible. So I've never been in such a can-do institution as ASU is. We are not allowed to complain that things are hard, tough. They are. We just have to find the way forward.
That's really inspiring. I love that.
It's also exhausting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to send my kids to ASU now. This is a really beautiful mission.
I will say that I truly love the students there, and every opportunity I have, I spend time with them. I only teach first-year students, but I tend to mentor students across the different ages, and there's something very special about them. Some of the smartest students I've met in my entire life have been ASU students. There's no place like it.
So you get to, even though you're only teaching first year, you see that growth happen.
I see that growth happen. I also, because I've been at ASU for 5 years, I've seen students that I met in their first year already graduate, and that is a wonderful thing. And I stay in touch with as many of my students as I can. Many of them don't go very far. I've had a fair number of Indigenous students who live on nearby reservations and have been invited into their lives, which I really like. I've seen students. Some of my students are older; they have families of their own. It's great to feel like you are part of people's project of building the best lives for themselves.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a very slight distinction here. So you shared how the mission of ASU, how wellness is kind of built into the mission at ASU. What about the culture? Would you make any distinction between the mission and the culture of ASU and how that either supports or plays into well-being at work?
It is built into the culture when it comes to students, especially because we recognize that there has been a crisis in mental health among younger students and that they're coming out of high school needing a lot more help than they used to. And we work hard on that. We make sure that our professors have the tools that they need to reach out to their students and steer them toward the resources that we've built. We have a vice provost who's charged with wellness. She's a vice provost of wellness. She's also the dean of the nursing school. And that wellness charge is for the whole community. So it's students, staff, it's faculty. We try to have resources available for all when it comes to wellness in the whole sense of being able to have your needs addressed, whether they're psychological or physical or career, feeling good in your career and having your ambitions satisfied. So it is an important charge of the university, and it is the place where we're investing resources for future growth. So our biggest new initiative is called ASU Health. ASU Health is a constellation of everything we do in that arena of wellness and health. It include the building of a new medical school and a school of public health and technology. So big investments there, but I think COVID taught us that those investments are necessary when it comes to building a future for the state.
And so an institution the size of ASU, I presume has pretty comprehensive medical services for students, mental health services for students. Are there some less obvious things that you think really help with the well-being of the student base? Are there other services or things that you might do with someone when you see that they're struggling outside of the big institutional?
Well, when we see that they're struggling, and this is a conversation I have with faculty a lot, I remind faculty that they are not trained in mental health giving help when it comes to mental health, but they are trained when it comes to hooking students into the resources where we can rely on that. That's what they need. I often say if a student is, for example, having a breakdown in your office, it's important not to abandon that student, but to walk them over to the health center, stay with them for a while if it takes someone some time to get to see them. Our faculty can't be charged with making the student better, but they can take as part of their job getting the students connected to those resources, and students, that really matters for them when that happens. I would say another thing, and this is really important to me as a Dean of Humanities, we've invested quite a bit in what's called the health humanities. Health humanities is really just using the traditional humanities disciplines along the lines of wellness, self-expression, understanding who we are as humans, understanding our own bodies and embodiment. There's lots of literature that's been written that opens up new ways of thinking about the world when it comes to the wellness realm. So we are starting a new undergraduate certificate in health humanities. We're going to build along those ways because the only way to address some of the crises that we're facing with health and wellness is to marshal every discipline possible. And humanities has a lot to contribute there.
Wow.
So, quick follow-up. When you draw this picture of someone's having a crisis in somebody's office, and you hand take that person to the appropriate resource, I'm thinking, I'm not sure all workplaces do that with their employees. And you mentioned that especially the students have, lots of resources. So, how is it different for for your staff, for your faculty?
Staff and faculty do have access to some really good resources through the university centralized. There isn't a place necessarily to walk to because that wouldn't, at the scale we're at, that wouldn't really work for our multiple campuses. But there's always a helpline that's available. There are always counselors to hook people up with, in fact, dedicated ones for faculty and staff. And those resources are easily findable on our website. But I always encourage my leaders to share that information with faculty and staff at least once during every semester so that they know what's available to them should they find themselves in a personal crisis, in a family crisis, in an emergency moment. There are ways to help almost anyone.
That's great.
If you wouldn't mind, could I just tell one story that really stays close to my heart
stories.
from when I first came? So, I came from a small private university that you would think, because our tuition was so high, had every resource for students. But routinely, when our students found themselves in trouble, we just had to scrap together whatever we could. And faculty, because faculty have good hearts, would do things like fundraise for a student who suddenly had lost their parents and, was in crisis, had no home. We would do sometimes we would invite a student to live with us, or you name it, that's what we do. That actually doesn't work very well, and it is based on what's available. At ASU, when I first came here, during my first month, I was faced with a faculty member finding out that one of her students had no place to live and he was living in his car. And I just thought, okay, I guess we're gonna have to fundraise. Like, what is it? We'll collect money. We'll do something. But when I brought it to our dean of undergraduates, who's our dean for students, he's like, oh no, we have a process right in place. Get me the name. We'll get the person a room. We'll get them a living stipend. We'll make sure their books are covered. We'll take care of it. And that's exactly what happened. So they gave the student a room in the dorms. They made sure that the student had food vouchers. They got the student back on his feet, and he was fine. And he was always grateful for the fact that in this moment of crisis where things could have gone so badly wrong, we had a process because this happens to other people. And I think for him, finding out that he was not alone in the crisis, that others had gone through it and the university had supported him, that just meant the world to him. So it was beautiful to see that. And that was a reminder that we need to think about these things in advance and have something in place to take care of people so that in a moment of crisis, we can say to them, oh no, it's okay. We can help you. And here's exactly how.
I've got one more. So you've been not always in the leader position for 25 years, but you've been moving into leadership positions most of your career. Do you think there are more stressors for the faculty and the students now than you've seen in the past? I mean, this is part of what we're hearing in the trending of well-being and wellness in the workplace. Is there's a lot going on. Do you see that? What do you think are some of those extra stressors these days?
I think it was difficult for many communities to come out of COVID, the pandemic lockdown, dealing with the post-traumatic stress of having gone through it, dealing with loss, fear, anxiety. I think especially for many faculty, showing up to the classroom became a space of fear because it seemed like, some of the memories from COVID were, if I teach, I might die, I might get infected, something terrible might happen to me. For a little while, there was a disjunction where our students came in and they were so happy to be out of COVID university and back into life, where they're just like, we're here all the time. This is it. This is great. And had very little patience for faculty and staff who needed a little more time to just kind of habituate themselves to the new normal. I think finally we're starting to catch up to that. I don't see as much anxiety coming into the fall semester. It seems like we're fully back. Great. That's good. There's a certain joyfulness that also seems to be back too, and a lot of advanced planning. Having said that, I think one of the things that COVID did emphasize for all of us is that we have to weave wellness into everything that we do. It can't be an emergency add-on that we're doing because we had a pandemic or because we faced a crisis. It has to be part of what we do to support communities from now on. Think about wellness as a part of anything that we're undertaking.
Absolutely.
I hope a lot of I know there are some organizational leaders that are already thinking that way, but that it seems to be what we need in this time, right? Is it more of a proactive approach to well-being and wellness?
It is, and also demonstrating, especially faculty to students, how to take care of yourself as part of what you're doing and in being an effective student. That is one of the things that we've learned now went badly wrong, is that we thought it would help students to not have deadlines, to say, if you got something going on, turn in late, that's fine. Actually, that really destroyed students' ability to calendar, to be committed to themselves and committed to others. So now we've learned that it is better to teach students to commit to things, commit to themselves as a kind of achievement, commit to the classroom community, commit to presence. That is, we kind of had to back up and reassert that part of what we're teaching students in the classroom is to take care of themselves and to take care of the others that are in that classroom, and that's something that we should talk about as a practice. You might be studying U.S. history, but you're also studying how to make a future for yourself in a world that's complicated, and how to take care of yourself and others as part of that process.
That's fabulous. So let's see. You've shared a lot about your personal take on well-being at ASU. You shared a story. Do you have any other stories you want to share before we talk about your book?
I will share one other story that I think about a lot, and it has to do with a little leadership saying that became very present to me after I had done the series of leadership workshops with the two of you, which I really valued. That came at such a good time in my life for thinking about the relationship between embodiment, leadership, well-being, kind of taking your own temperature and all of that.
Yes.
There's a little saying that somebody had given to me at a leadership workshop. I don't even remember when. I think they took it from a title of a book that I haven't read, but it was only the saying that stayed with me. And the saying was, leaders make the weather. And I think this is a book, but I don't know the whole story behind it. But it really stayed with me as when a leader comes into the room, it doesn't matter if it's a classroom, if it's a meeting, your body is immediately readable to all those present. If you have something going on, if you have something churning inside of you, there's no use hiding it because it's going to be evident. Yeah. It's better to admit it. I just found out some really challenging news. My mother's in the hospital. My daughter crashed my car. I'm going to take a deep breath, read it through this because we have things to focus on, but please excuse me if I have a little bit of turbulent weather going on. Or simply taking a few moments before you come into the room to kind of do the body set, see where you are, think about what you want to project and what that community needs from you at that moment so that you can come in with the smile, with the way that's going to put people at ease, with the signal that the weather in here is calm today. We're here together to explore or build something, but just to make sure that you check in with yourself, remind yourself that whatever is going on with you is contagious, and then proceed from there. So that's something that stays with me a lot, and I think really helped me to be a much more effective leader, especially in meetings where I no longer pretended that what was going on is invisible to others. I truly believe it's completely visible, and thinking about embodiment helped me to get to that realization.
I used to substitute teach. Well, it was a K through 12 school that would call me, but mostly it was junior high and elementary that needed substitutes. And most of these classrooms, it was a lower demographic. They were pretty problematic, and they don't like substitutes. They like their teachers. But there was this one teacher I really admired. It was a third grade classroom, which can be a difficult age. But she had, it must have been that quote up on her desk right there. But her classroom was night and day, always, compared to all of the other ones, year after year. Kids that I had before that didn't know how to function in a classroom, they did so well. And I think it was because she was managing her own internal weather, and she was implementing that. And it was amazing subbing for her all the time, because the kids, they just experienced effective leadership, I think.
I love that story, and it's simultaneously about what you have to do, right? I have to be in control and think about what I'm projecting, but also asking yourself the question of, what do my students need of me? What does my community need of me? They need a certain amount of calm modeled so that they can respond to it. And a lot of that happens very quietly. You don't even realize that it's going on, but that's why it's useful to take those few moments beforehand rather than to find yourself in the maelstrom where it's too late. Things have already spun out of control.
Even students and even children can respect that and respond pretty well to that. If you can say something simple like, today I kind of have a cold, I'll be talking a little quieter. Let's try to keep the classroom quiet for me today. And they respect that. I think being authentic and showing up that way does make a difference, even for children.
One of the best classes I ever taught was one where for the first 5 minutes, I could not figure out why everyone giggled every time I went to the board. And then I just looked at the class. I'm like, what is going on? Is my shirt not tucked in? Is something going on? And they're like, you have vomit all the way down the back of your shirt. Because I burped my daughter before I left. Just like pat on the back, and didn't realize that the milk had gone off. I don't know how that happened. But because they thought that was so funny, I'm like, it's true. I have a 3-month-old daughter. I came flying out of the house today. I was so eager to get to this class, and I wanted to teach you all well. Please excuse my vomit. So they loved that little saying. I got it back at the reviews at the end of the class. They're like, when Professor Cohen said, please excuse my vomit, we knew he was a human being, and the class was just great afterwards. But there's something about like owning the details of your life that helps you to bond with people.
I have to share a short story like that, if you don't mind. I was teaching a class that I taught a lot in a lot of different places. It was an all-day, very intense simulation course, and I happened to be doing it in Germany, and I kept making reference to when I teach this to people in the US, and I would just after a while I noticed every time I said that there was like a massive eye rolling going on in the room, and it was very subtle, and so I finally stopped and said, I feel like you're reacting to something. I don't know what it is. And they explain, the last thing they want to hear about is my U.S. student base. You're in Germany. Tell us about Germans.
I love that.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yep. But it's also being attentive to the body language of the room.
Yep.
And there's a lesson, that the message that they're sending is a lesson there.
Yeah. And this is about performance, but it's also about well-being, right? Letting these things out, checking in with people, letting the stuff come out from under the surface so we can get our get our work done that we want to do here together.
And I know we started to talk a little bit about my book project, but this is actually related to it, where one of the things I was thinking about, I started to write the book during a time of widespread, significant denial around climate change.
Yeah.
And, it seemed like it didn't matter how many facts in the world we had about the fact that climate is changing. Like, look at the data. It shows it. You just couldn't get some people to believe it. And it got me to thinking, I'm trained as a medievalist, it got me to thinking that all the words we have about climate are also words about emotion. So climate, you can talk about the climate of a room. Atmosphere, you can talk about the atmosphere.
Oh, definitely.
And part of it for me is to acknowledge that many of the decisions and inclinations that happen in our lives have emotional investments that are immune to facts. So if you want to convince people of climate change, you have to change the climate around what they're thinking. When it comes, stories are about feeling more than they are facts sometimes. What kinds of stories can we tell that change climate, change atmosphere, predispose a change of heart rather than a change of mind? Sometimes the mind has to catch up to where the heart has already gone. So I was thinking about this a lot when it comes to climate change stories that we tell. I had been long fascinated with the story of Noah and his ark and the various ways in which that story has been told over time. And one way of telling it is the kind of happy version that children have, where it's a colorful boat. You load your animals, it sails away, the rainbow comes, the dove flies, all that great stuff. But in Genesis, the story is a lot more complicated than that. And I really became interested in the more complicated retellings of the Noah story, and also the difference between the Noah story in Christian tradition versus Jewish tradition. The Christian tradition, Noah is usually praised for his perfect obedience. God says, build an ark. He builds an ark, sails away to its destination. In Jewish tradition, especially in a series of arguments among rabbis called Midrash, he's taken to task because unlike other people in the Bible, say Cain, Abraham, or Moses, when God proposes something that maybe is not the best idea in the world, they argue back and say, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Mm-hmm. You sure you want to destroy the Jewish people for building a golden calf? Like, we've come a long way. Yeah. Cain even says, are you sure you want me destroyed? And has the special mark placed upon him from his argument with God. The rabbi said, why didn't Noah argue with God and try to save more people? He only saved his family. So the idea was maybe he was okay in his own generation, but compared to others, he was not. He didn't try to save more people. And the idea that too often when we talk about climate change, we become resigned to saving small communities as if that's the only way forward, rather than extending welcome and refuge to larger communities, was on my mind and was behind this book that I wrote.
Wow.
There's a connection there between authority and the sacrifice of well-being. And it brings me back to my days at Intel when there were products that were selling so well and worth so much money that if the cost of getting them to market was, a few people don't make it along the way, that was okay. Right, and that message came with authority from the top of the organization. You got to break a few eggs to make something worthwhile. And so it's interesting for me to hear that connected all the way back to one of the biblical stories.
In a really foundational story that can teach us, can kind of like set our own climate for how we deal with catastrophe. If we believe that we should be resigned to it, we'll go down a certain road. If we believe that we should argue for more inclusion, we'll go down a different road. I'll give one other example that really stays with me, and it's in, there's the very first illustrated Bible that exists that we have is called the Vienna Genesis. I think it's from the 2nd century. It has the first depiction of Noah's Ark, and Noah's Ark is a pyramid that is sailing away. So the perspective is the point of view of the people that are on the outside watching it sail away. And as it turns out, that is the most frequently replicated version of Noah's Ark, meaning that the artist stands with those who are doomed to drown and watches the ark abandon them. And I just thought, there's an insight here. Why is it that we lose the perspective of those on the other side of the ark? And also, why is it throughout human history, artists have wanted to stand with the drowned rather than with the saved? So I think that helps us to orient toward a more humane world where we can include more people when we think about refuge, conservation, wellness, well-being, and not imagine that we have to draw a boundary around that smaller world in order to save it.
I think that parallels exactly what you're doing at ASU with the 90% success rate of the freshmen moving on. You're drawing a much, much larger circle than was done before.
We're trying, and I think that's why ASU really does coincide with my values for that inclusion and access mission. I do think it is aligned with the question of, given that the world will always send difficulties our way, how do we make it so the maximum number of people can not only endure those difficulties, but thrive despite them?
In your book, do you, because you're addressing it, I heard it in that previous response. When I think about climate change, the concern is it's not going to be horrific for everybody all at once, but it's going to be horrific for a lot of people real soon. Already is. Mm-hmm. And how different societies are sort of closing in their circle. Do you talk about that in the book, and
we do,
or do you leave that to our imaginations?
No need to leave it to the imagination, because I feel like we adopt that wall in your small ark kind of mentality. We did it during the pandemic, right? Those who could afford to pull up their gate and live in a small house for a while lived in their house and often lived in comfort. We do it with our love of gated communities where we keep people out. We do it when we imagine that we can turn a nation into a walled community by building a wall that's going to exclude, and so a flood of refugees are not going to be able to make it on the inside. We do it every time we choose to build a barrier, make a self-contained fortification of any sort. It's just, it almost comes naturally. But one of the arguments of the book is the reason it comes so naturally is because the Noah's Ark story is so embedded in the way that we think through what we're supposed to do in a time of catastrophe. The other thing that we insist in the book is that during catastrophe, one thing we know from history is that suffering will always be unevenly distributed. And it's going to be the well-off who don't suffer as much, right? It's going to be the people who are lucky enough to be in Noah's family, for example. They'll sail away to a new beginning. They'll be okay. But those on the outside are, if you don't think with their stories, they're the ones who get left behind to perish. And there's something that's cold-hearted about that and that needs to be rethought.
I think that shift that you're talking about from that self-survival instinct and that the deeply embedded narrative that we have, I think to shift out of that, it has to happen partly in the body. Like in the Leader Lab, so much of our learning is a whole body embodied experience to really shift our nervous system away from that self-protective kind of, desperate for survival mentality, to shift into a more inclusive, expansive idea of not just survival, but thriving, like you said.
Yeah, Amanda, I think you're exactly right on that, because during a moment of stress, right, won't we all just shut down, make ourselves small,
Yep.
brace, run sometimes, find safety, but then, I think we always have to ask ourselves, well, if we give into that impulse, at what cost to others do we do it? And isn't it better to find the way that more people can survive, eventually thrive, rather than give in to that selfish first impulse? And I think you're exactly right. Part of it is an embodied reaction, right? Fight or flight.
Yep.
And either one of those seems so individual. What about communalize? Right? If we can get into a little bit more control, then we can understand that we have a charge that's bigger than ourselves. Get that centeredness first, so that we can go out and help others to find a way to be okay.
Yeah.
And having a society move in that direction always comes back to education, right? And it makes me wonder. I didn't know all this about ASU's mission and the link to wellness and well-being, but it's pretty explicit. And do you think the student base is picking up on that? Do you think they take any of that, ASU mission, like there was somebody looking out for me, and we were all asked to look out for everybody else? Do they take that with them? How would you know?
I think the answer is yes. I'm actually surprised at how many of our students, faculty, and staff know the university charter, which is its mission articulation, well, and talk about it as a reason why they've chosen to be at ASU. I'm not going to say that every student, and of course not. We have a huge variety of students, and there are plenty that are there to, get their degree, have a lot of fun, move on, do their next thing. But it would be impossible to move through your 4 years at ASU and not have at least heard repeatedly of what it is that moves the university. Our messaging is really superb at ASU. I'm kind of in awe of it. So you can't escape things like the charter and what it means and how that impacts everything that we do. And we try our hardest to get our students to think about that as a component of what they're doing, not only in their lives, but even in classrooms, and the responsibilities that they have, not just to get their own good grades, but responsibility to watch out for the other students in the class. So that's what community building is. We try to teach them effective collaboration. You can't be an effective leader. You can't live a satisfying life unless you've learned how to collaborate well with others.
Absolutely.
Yep. Back to education.
Back to education. This is why I believe education is a human right. But I also see why that there are forces that have worked hard to ensure that public education doesn't have the resources that it needs. Right? A well-educated populace can be dangerous to certain ideas, or to put it the other way, a well-educated populace is actually essential to the thriving of democracy. And if we want more and better democracy, we need more and better education. Those things seem clear to me.
Wonderful. We're getting pretty close to our time. So to wrap up, is there anything else you want to add? And we also want to tell everyone how to get a hold of your book.
Well, I want to say that this has been a really great conversation. I'm very grateful for it. You've helped me to see the ways in which what I thought were disparate parts of the life I was leading kind of come together, even in a book that I wrote that's a work of scholarship. The book itself, Noah's Archive, is available on Amazon. It's published by University of Minnesota Press. You can get it from them too.
Great.
And there are parts of it that are up on the web that anybody can read if they want to. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah. So I wrote this book with my friend Julian Yates. We'd like to see it in as many hands as possible. It was truly there's a work of writing in friendship, but also writing with a mission. We wanted people to have this chance to think about their own attitudes in a time of climate crisis. So, yeah.
That's great.
Can I ask about the special spelling of archive?
Sure.
So you deliberately, is that a misspelling, or is that an ancient spelling, or educate us?
It's Noah's Archive because, the ark is the box that he saves everything in.
Okay. Yeah.
But an archive, which comes from the same word. It's just that one is English, one is Greek. An archive is a place that you save things that you want to preserve. And we wanted everyone to know that, or think about the fact that when Noah creates his archive, he's making the choices that anyone who wants to save things has to make. That is, there's a thoughtfulness that has to go into, if we want to send anything into the future, preserve anything into the future, we have to give it careful and deliberate thought. And that's either something Noah did or failed to do, depending on how you read that story. So it's really to emphasize that the ark is a kind of treasure box that Noah stowed with the things that would seed a new world, a world to come. But it's also important to think about what he didn't put in there as well.
Really look forward to reading the book.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I get it on my Kindle?
I should be available on Kindle.
Okay.
Yeah, should be.
That's wonderful. Well, I have seen so much alignment between the scholarly book that you've written, between your career, and between your embodied person and the way you're showing up. It's been a real treat and just a pleasure to interview with you. It's been wonderful.
The time has gone by so quickly. It has been a real pleasure.
Yeah, could have used more time.
Yes.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And a special thanks to Jeffrey. And please be sure to tune in to us next time. Mind and Body at Work with the East Valley Leader Lab. We'll see you. Bye.